This is Mac OS Ken.
Jeers for Apple's DMA compliance plans, Apple Card savings rates go up, and developers get new OS betas. It is Monday, the 29th of January, 2024. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. Players who play on iPhone are not happy with Apple's concessions to the European Union ahead of implementation of the Digital Markets Act, or DMA. We went pretty in-depth on this last Friday, boiling down some of the biggest points. Every app that runs on iPhone will apparently need to be notarized by Apple, whether it comes from Apple's App Store or a third party. Third-party app stores will still need Apple's approval. Apple still has a charge/commission structure plan for apps wherever they're sold, and developers have the option of staying with Apple's current terms of service, incurring no costs other than the current costs, and calling for no changes. That is a tremendous oversimplification of tons of text that passed last Thursday. For more in-depth info, you can check out last Friday's episode of Mac OS Ken. You can also check out the press release in Apple's online newsroom. Now, it's probably also an oversimplification to say that players who play on iPhone are not happy with Apple's concessions. That said, there has been negative reaction from names you know, including some who'd be expected to react negatively. We talked Friday about the displeasure expressed by Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games. Surprising nobody, he referred to Apple's DMA-related changes as a devious new instance of malicious compliance. Now, if I asked you to guess the next CEO to step up to the plate, I'll bet you could. Thing is, I wouldn't be able to hear you, so I'll tell you instead. A piece from TechCrunch had Daniel Ek, CEO of music streaming giant Spotify, calling Apple's announced compliance, at best, vague and misleading, a masterclass in distortion, and a new low for the company. What's really frustrating Ek, though, is the €0.5 fee Apple is planning for apps offered outside the App Store. Referred to by Apple as a core technology fee, the company says iOS apps distributed from the App Store or an alternative app marketplace will pay €0.5 for each first annual install per year over a 1 million threshold. According to Ek, with our EU Apple install base in the 100 million range, this new tax on downloads and updates could skyrocket our customer acquisition costs, potentially increasing them tenfold. This is we have to pay on every install or update to our free or paid app, even for those who no longer use the service. So where does that leave us? Under the new terms, we cannot afford these fees if we want to be profitable, so our only option is to stick with the status quo, the very thing we've been fighting against for 5 years. Also speaking against Apple's announced changes, the Coalition for App Fairness. That they would stand against Apple's plan is not a surprise. They were pretty much set up to stand against the App Store. A piece from 9to5Mac had that organization's executive director, Rick Van Meter, arguing, Apple clearly has no intention to comply with the DMA. Apple is introducing new fees on direct downloads and payments they do nothing to process, which violates the law. This plan does not achieve the DMA's goal to increase competition and fairness in the digital market. It is not fair, reasonable, nor non-discriminatory. For its part, Apple gave something of a milquetoast response. A few articles had the Cupertino company saying, "We're happy to support the success of all developers, including Spotify, which has the most successful music streaming app in the world. The changes we're sharing for apps in the European Union give developers choice, with new options to distribute iOS apps and process payments. Every developer can choose to stay on the same terms in place today, And under the new terms, more than 99% of developers would pay the same or less to Apple. While Firefox parent Mozilla is apparently not a member of the Coalition for App Fairness, they too see Apple's announced compliance as somewhere between disappointing and disingenuous. The Verge had Mozilla spokesperson Damiano Damont saying late last week, "We are still reviewing the technical details, but are extremely disappointed with Apple's proposed plan to restrict the newly announced Browser Engine Kit to EU-specific apps. The effect of this would be to force an independent browser like Firefox to build and maintain two separate browser implementations, a burden Apple themselves will not have to bear." The spokesperson went on to say Apple's proposals fail to give consumers viable choices by making it as painful as possible for others to provide competitive alternatives to Safari. This is another example of Apple creating barriers to prevent true browser competition on iOS. Now, if you want opinions on the issue from people who cover the industry, 3 headlines might tell you how that's trending. They include, the main driver of Apple's success has become its biggest liability. That's from the Wall Street Journal. Apple's reluctant, punitive compliance with regulators will burn its political and developer goodwill, so says a piece from TechCrunch. And Apple's third-party App Store announcements guarantee the company will end up in court, so says a piece from 9to5Mac. Sliding over to the business side of Apple's planned DMA compliance, another Apple watching analyst says there is very little to it at this time. I told you last week of a note from JP Morgan saying that, as things stand now, this is not a big deal for a couple of reasons. First, the €0.5 fee Apple will charge will balance out the reduced commissions, and besides, Europe only accounts for about 6% of App Store revenue. Weighing in a day later, Evercore analyst Amit Daryanani. Apple 3.0 ran part of a note he wrote on Friday. Not only does he see little financial downside for Apple, he says that €0.5 fee could actually end up making more money for the Cupertino company. After running through a number of questions, he says investors are asking, what's the financial impact from sideloading? How likely is this to spread elsewhere? And questions like that. Daryanani says the DMA-related changes are likely to equal a hit to Apple's bottom line of less than 1%. Additionally, he and his do not see such regulations and compliance moves like those Apple's announced spreading to other regions, though he does see a possible investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice as a wild card. Daryanani has an outperform rating on Apple shares. His price target on the shares is $220. The annual percentage rate on the Apple Card savings account has gone up again. Users received a message to that effect on their iPhones late last week. Savings accounts opened in spring of 2023 with an APR of 4.15%. There, they stayed until December, when Cult of Mac says the APR rose to 4.25%. Earlier this month, it went up to 4.35%. As of Saturday, the Cult and Apple's messaging say the APR on Apple savings accounts stands at 4.5%. I mentioned last week that a lot of the changes Apple's making for DMA compliance in the EU are coming in iOS 17.4. What I failed to mention was that the first developer beta of that rolled out last week. Mac Rumors ran a report Thursday saying that betas of both iOS and iPadOS 17.4 had been seeded to developers. Making way for sideloading and such are the headline changes, though others are coming along. For example, the Cupertino company says the Apple Podcasts app is getting automatic transcriptions. Promoted to podcasters as an accessibility feature, the company is adding machine-generated transcripts. Those will be available in the app soon after the podcast posts. Apple's messaging says with transcripts, Your audience can read the full text of an episode, search the episode for a specific word or phrase, and tap the text to play from that point in the episode. As an episode plays, each word is highlighted, making it easy to follow along. Additionally, Apple says transcripts can also be accessed from the episode details page. Mac Rumor says developers testing it out have discovered nearly all of the podcasts in their library show transcripts. The site figures Apple will share more information and limitations in March when iOS 17.4 is released to the public. The next generation of CarPlay is showing signs of life. Another report from Mac Rumor says last week's iOS developer beta references 8 new CarPlay applications. Apps among the 8 include Car Camera, Climate, Media, and Trips. Does all this mean coming soon? Who can say? According to the report, the next-gen CarPlay section of Apple's site now says first models arrive in 2024, where it used to say vehicle announcements coming in late 2023. Of course, there are 11 months left in 2024. Mac Rumor says the beta offers no indication as to when the functionality will go live. Perhaps the most exciting part of iOS 17.4 and accompanying updates, a piece from iLounge says new emoji are on the way. I don't know why I love them like I do, but I do. New ones on the way include a no head shake, a yes head shake, a broken chain, a brown mushroom, a phoenix, and more. I look forward to finding and not using any of those, same as most of the rest of the emoji, which I still love. No idea why. Also out to developers last week, the first beta of tvOS 17.4. The Mac Rumors blurb on that says the usual stuff. Changes in tvOS updates are usually back-end, nothing kinky, and offer no readily apparent new features. And finally today, the Apple-owned Shazam app got an interesting update last week. 9 to 5 Mac has the Cupertino company indicating that the latest version of the app now lets users identify songs around them or even within apps while wearing headphones. That's said to include songs playing in another app, such as Instagram or TikTok. The piece explains that identifying songs in other apps is not new, but being able to do so with headphones is. If you want to try it out, you are looking for version 17.3 of the Shazam app for iPhone or iPad. They are free and available now in the App Store. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media. Online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.